As a park ranger, I had heard many stories about the Wendigo. It was said to be a creature that roamed the northern forests, feasting on human flesh. But I never believed in such tales until that fateful night. I was on patrol, walking along a path in the darkness, when I heard a strange noise. It was a mix of a growl and a scream, and it sent shivers down my spine. I quickly shone my flashlight in the direction of the noise, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was making it. And there it was, the Wendigo. Tall and thin, with matted fur and long, sharp claws. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and it looked straight at me. I froze in fear. I had never seen anything like it before. It stood there, staring at me for what felt like hours. I could hear my heart beating in my chest, and I was sure it could hear it too. The Wendigo took a step closer, and I could feel its hot breath on my face. I closed my eyes, waiting for the worst, but then it turned and ran off into the woods. I was shaken to my core. I knew that the Wendigo was real, and that it could come back at any moment. I hurried back to my station, hoping to find safety there. But even as I locked the doors and windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Wendigo was watching me, waiting for its next opportunity to attack. The memory of that encounter still haunts me to this day, and I pray that I never have to face that terrifying creature again. The Wendigo stood there, looking at me with its glowing red eyes. I could see its long, sharp claws and its matted fur. It was thin and tall, like it had been stretched out too far. Its jaw was slack, as if it was waiting to take a bite out of me. I knew I had to be careful. The Wendigo was known to be incredibly fast and incredibly strong. It could rip a human limb from limb without breaking a sweat. I took a step back, hoping to put some distance between us. But the Wendigo took a step closer. Its breath was hot on my face, and I could smell the stench of decay on its breath. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, and I knew that if I didn't act fast, I was done for. I tried to reach for my gun, but my hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't get a grip on it.
The Wendigo took another step closer, and I could see the saliva dripping from its jaws.
And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the Wendigo turned and ran off into the woods. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I hurried back to my station, locking the doors and windows behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, hoping that the Wendigo wouldn't come back. But even as the sun came up and the birds began to sing, I couldn't shake the feeling of terror that had settled in my bones. I knew that the Wendigo was still out there, waiting for its next victim. As the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped out into the woods, I felt like the Wendigo was lurking just beyond my sight. I started to lose sleep, and my nerves were constantly frayed. One night, I heard the same growl and scream that I had heard during my first encounter with the Wendigo. I knew it was back, and I had to act fast. I grabbed my gun and headed out into the darkness, determined to take down the creature that had been haunting me for weeks. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, the growling and screaming grew louder. And then, suddenly, it stopped. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. I knew that the Wendigo was still out there, somewhere. And then I saw it. A flash of red in the darkness, like a pair of glowing eyes. I aimed my gun and fired, but the creature was too fast. It disappeared into the woods, leaving me alone in the darkness once again. After that night, I knew that I couldn't keep living in fear. I had to do something to stop the Wendigo once and for all. I gathered a group of my fellow rangers and we set out into the woods, armed to the teeth with guns and knives. We searched for hours, but we couldn't find any trace of the Wendigo. We were about to give up when we heard a growling and screaming in the distance.
We followed the noise, and soon we came across a clearing in the woods.
There, in the middle of the clearing, stood the Wendigo. It was even more terrifying up close than I had ever imagined. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its claws were longer and sharper than I had remembered. We aimed our guns and fired, but the Wendigo was too fast. It leapt at us, slashing at us with its claws. We fought back with all our might, but the creature was too powerful. In the end, we managed to take down the Wendigo, but at a great cost. We had lost 2 of our own in the fight, and I had been injured badly. From that day on, I knew that I would never be the same. The memory of that encounter would haunt me for the rest of my life.
Before we go on with the stories, I remind you to like the video and subscribe to support the channel.
I had heard stories about skinwalkers, but I always brushed them off as just legends. That was until that fateful night. I was on patrol when I saw movement in the brush. At first, I thought it might be a lost hiker or a wild animal, but as I got closer, I saw a creature that made my blood run cold. It was a skinwalker. I knew it immediately. Its fur was matted and dirty, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural, yellow light. Its head was that of a wolf, but its body was that of a man. The creature stood on two legs, but its arms were elongated, almost like those of an ape. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do. The Skinwalker snarled at me, baring its razor-sharp teeth. I tried to back away, but it charged at me with lightning speed. I fired my gun in self-defense, and the creature retreated. But I knew it wouldn't be the end. The Skinwalker had tasted my fear and knew where to find me. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that encounter, always on edge, always listening for the sound of rustling brush or glowing eyes in the darkness. The Skinwalker had marked me, and I knew that it would only be a matter of time before it came back for revenge. I knew I would have to be ready, but I also knew that no amount of preparation could protect me from the terror that awaited me. Despite my fear, I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for the Skinwalker to come for me. I had to be proactive and find a way to defend myself against this ancient, malevolent force. I began researching everything I could about skinwalkers, poring through old legends and modern accounts of encounters with the creatures. I learned that they were known for their shape-shifting abilities and their ability to possess humans. I knew I had to be careful, as skinwalkers were notorious for their trickery and deception. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my fellow rangers. The Skinwalker could be anyone or anything. Days turned into weeks, and I became more and more paranoid. I couldn't eat or sleep, constantly on edge, listening for any sign of the creature's return. My colleagues began to worry about me, but I couldn't tell them the truth. They wouldn't understand. One night, as I was sitting in my cabin, I heard a knock on the door. I hesitated before answering, my hand trembling on the doorknob. When I opened the door, I saw a figure standing in the shadows, its face obscured by the darkness. "Come with me," a voice said, and I knew immediately that it was the Skinwalker. It had come for me. I grabbed my gun and ran out into the night, the Skinwalker in hot pursuit. We ran through the woods, the creature's claws tearing at my clothes as I dodged trees and branches. Finally, I saw a clearing ahead, and I knew I had to make my stand. I turned and faced the Skinwalker, my gun pointed straight at its chest. The creature paused for a moment, as if sizing me up, before lunging at me with a ferocity I had never seen before. I fired my gun, and the Skinwalker screamed in pain as it fell to the ground, writhing in agony. I knew it wasn't dead, but it was wounded. I took the opportunity to run back to the safety of my cabin, locking the door behind me. Despite resigning from my position as a park ranger and moving away from the Southwest, the memory of that terrifying encounter with the Skinwalker continued to haunt me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still watching me, even from hundreds of miles away. I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the fear and paranoia that had consumed me. But no matter how busy I was, the memory of that night would always resurface in my mind, causing me to break out in a cold sweat and sending shivers down my spine. As the years passed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, that I had imagined the entire encounter with the Skinwalker. But deep down, I knew that it had been real, and that the creature was still out there, waiting for its next victim. One night, as I was driving home from work, I saw something move in my rearview mirror. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of yellow eyes and matted fur. It was the Skinwalker, and it was following me. I drove faster, desperate to outrun the creature, but it seemed to be gaining on me with each passing moment. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck as it lunged at my car, clawing at the windows and trying to force its way inside. I swerved off the road and into a ditch, my car coming to a jarring stop. I looked up to see the Skinwalker standing in front of me, its eyes blazing with fury. I knew there was no escape, no way to fight back against this ancient and powerful creature. I closed my eyes and waited for the end, but instead of tearing me apart, the Skinwalker simply disappeared into the night, leaving me shaken and bewildered. I knew that I had been lucky to survive, and that the Skinwalker would always be out there, lurking in the shadows and waiting for its next victim. From that moment on, I vowed never to return to the Southwest, and to always watch my back, for fear of encountering the Skinwalker once again.
It was a quiet night in the forest, and I was on my routine patrol as a park ranger in New Jersey. I had heard stories of the Jersey Devil, a mythical creature that was said to have haunted the area for centuries, but I had never given much thought to it. That is until I saw it with my own two eyes. As I drove down a remote road, I noticed something in the sky. At first, I thought it was just a bird, but as it got closer, my heart began to race. It was much larger than any bird I had ever seen, with wings that spanned wider than my car. As it flew closer, I could see its body, a strange and unnatural combination of a horse and a bat. And its eyes glowed a fierce red, piercing through the darkness like two fiery orbs. I couldn't move, couldn't take my eyes off of the creature as it flew towards me, its pointed tail whipping through the air. It let out a blood-curdling screech that shook me to my core, and then it was gone, disappearing into the night sky as quickly as it had come. I reported the sighting to my colleagues, hoping for some explanation or reassurance, but they just laughed it off, telling me that I must have imagined it. But I knew what I saw, and the memory of that creature, the Jersey Devil, still haunts me to this day, a reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot explain or understand. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of the leaves or whisper of the wind made me jump, my heart pounding in my chest. I started to avoid that remote road where I had seen the Jersey Devil, but it seemed like no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the feeling of dread that had settled over me. And then, one night, as I was patrolling the forest, I heard the same blood-curdling screech that I had heard before. It was coming from the direction of the remote road. I knew I shouldn't go, knew it was a trap, but something inside of me compelled me to investigate. As I drove down the road, my headlights illuminating the way, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The Jersey Devil was perched on a tree, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It let out another screech, and I could see its sharp teeth glinting in the light. I tried to reverse out of there, but my car wouldn't start. I was trapped, alone, with the creature that I had once thought was just a myth. The Jersey Devil launched itself off the tree, its wings propelling it towards me. I could see its claws, sharp and deadly, reaching for me. And then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone again, disappearing into the night. My car started, and I drove back to the ranger station, shaking and sweating. My colleagues still didn't believe me, but I knew what I had seen. And I knew that I would never forget it. The Jersey Devil was real, and it was out there, waiting for its next victim. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to be hiding something, and every sound made me jump. I started to carry a weapon with me on patrols, just in case I encountered the Jersey Devil again. Months went by without incident, and I started to let my guard down. Maybe it had been a one-time encounter, I thought. Maybe the Jersey Devil had moved on to another area. But then, one night, I received a call from a group of hikers who claimed they had seen something in the woods. They were terrified, their voices shaking as they described a creature with wings and glowing red eyes. I knew immediately that it was the Jersey Devil. I tried to calm the hikers down, telling them to stay put while I made my way to their location. As I made my way through the forest, I could hear the sound of wings flapping in the distance. Suddenly, the Jersey Devil was there, in front of me, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. It was bigger than I remembered, more ferocious, and it was angry. It let out a deafening screech, and I could feel the ground beneath me shaking. I raised my weapon, aiming for the creature, but it was too fast, too powerful. It launched itself at me, its claws extended, and I knew that this was it, the end. But then, out of nowhere, a shot rang out, and the Jersey Devil fell to the ground. My colleagues had arrived, armed and ready, and together we finished off the creature. It was a victory, but it was also a reminder. The Jersey Devil may be dead, but there are other things out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for their chance to strike. And as a park ranger, it was my duty to protect those who venture into the wilderness, to keep them safe from the horrors that lie within.
I had heard all sorts of stories about the Sasquatch, but I always dismissed them as myths and legends. That is, until one fateful night. I was patrolling the forest as usual when I heard a strange noise. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. As I followed the noise, I began to feel a sense of dread wash over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart pounded in my chest. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to know what was making that noise. I came to a clearing and saw something that made my blood run cold. It was the Sasquatch, the creature that I had always thought was just a myth. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in shaggy brown fur, and had enormous hands with long, sharp claws. Its eyes were black as coal and seemed to bore into my soul. I was frozen in fear as it approached me, its massive footsteps echoing through the clearing. And then it let out a roar that shook the ground beneath my feet. I thought I was done for, but just as it got close enough to touch me, it turned and ran off into the forest. I was left standing there, alone and terrified. I never went into the woods alone again, always wondering if the Sasquatch was still out there, waiting for its next victim. After that encounter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me whenever I patrolled the forest. Every time I heard a twig snap or a rustle in the bushes, my heart would skip a beat. One night, while patrolling with my partner, we heard the same guttural growl that I had heard during my encounter with the Sasquatch. My partner, who had always been skeptical of the Sasquatch stories, suddenly turned pale and suggested we turn back. But I couldn't let my fear get the best of me. I needed to know if the Sasquatch was really out there. So, against my partner's protests, I ventured deeper into the forest. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig. My heart was pounding in my chest as I felt the eyes of some unknown predator following me. Suddenly, I heard my partner scream. I ran towards the sound, only to find him lying on the ground, surrounded by broken branches and torn foliage. He was gasping for air, but he couldn't seem to speak. That's when I saw it, the Sasquatch, standing just a few feet away from us. Its eyes glinted in the moonlight, and its teeth bared in a menacing snarl. I knew we were no match for it. We stumbled backwards, but the Sasquatch was upon us in an instant. Its claws ripped through our clothing, and its fetid breath filled our nostrils. We tried to fight back, but it was too strong. I don't remember much after that. When I came to, I was in the hospital, with bandages covering my wounds. My partner was dead. I know that some people will still think that the Sasquatch is just a myth, but I know the truth. It's out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And I, for one, will never venture into the woods alone again. The encounter with the Sasquatch had left me with a deep fear of the forest. I could no longer patrol the area without being filled with dread and anxiety. But despite my fear, I couldn't just abandon my duties as a park ranger. So, I decided to seek help from the native people of the region, who were said to have a deep understanding of the forest and its creatures. I visited an elder of the tribe and recounted my encounter with the Sasquatch. The elder listened intently, nodding his head in understanding. Then, he spoke in his native tongue to another member of the tribe, who left the room and returned with a small vial filled with a dark liquid. The elder explained that the liquid was made from the bark of a rare tree found deep in the forest. It was said to have the power to ward off evil spirits and protect the bearer from harm. I was skeptical at first, but I was desperate to find a way to protect myself from the Sasquatch. So, I took the vial and drank the bitter liquid. From that day on, I felt a newfound confidence whenever I patrolled the forest. The fear that had once paralyzed me was replaced by a sense of calm and strength. And then, one night, I encountered the Sasquatch again. This time, I was ready. I stood my ground and held up the vial, which glowed with an otherworldly light. The Sasquatch hesitated, as if sensing the power of the liquid. And then, it let out a mournful howl and disappeared into the darkness. I never saw the Sasquatch again after that encounter, but I knew that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows.
Thanks for tuning into our scary story today. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more spooky tales like this one. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on at night.